evening. I'm Teresa Skubik, and this is Forum Daily for Thursday, March 13th. Canadian officials met with America's new Commerce Secretary in Washington today, 2 days after a trade dust-up with President Donald Trump that ended with Ontario pausing its surcharge on electricity exports to 3 states. Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc, Canadian Ambassador to the U.S. Kirsten Hillman, and Ontario Premier Doug Ford met with Howard Lutnick. Mr. Trump expanded his global trade war yesterday by hitting every country, including Canada, with 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. U.S. President Donald Trump is chastising Ontario for using electricity as a bargaining tool to fight off his tariff threats. In the Oval Office yesterday, President Trump said that Ontario, quote, withdrew their little threat once I announced what we were going to do.
We had a problem with Ontario, and they dropped that when I let them know what we were going to be doing. They dropped it immediately, so I'm glad, because electricity, you shouldn't be playing with electricity. It affects people's lives. Actually their life. I mean, it can affect, depending on weather, it can affect their life. So we can't do that. And it doesn't make sense that our country allows electricity to be made in another country and sold into us. Who did that deal for the United States? Okay, I looked at that long ago, and I said, that's not something that's very smart. Just like when Ontario charged us, everybody said, oh, they just charged. I said, this will be one in 1 hour. And they announced what we were going to do, and they withdrew their little threat.
Nearly 7 years after the New Brunswick government went to the Supreme Court to prevent the free movement of alcohol across the country, Premier Susan Holt says that the tariff war with the United States is forcing the province to rethink its approach to trade.
We're also working really hard on internal trade barriers. You heard from my colleague, Minister Jean-Claude Damour, that New Brunswick has already put up 50% of our procurement exemptions to be removed. We have taken the lead on labor mobility, and we have passed through Cabinet a program that recognizes provincial credentials from any other province in 52 regulated industries here in New Brunswick, so that people can come here and get to work in our health sectors, in our construction sectors, where they are needed. If you have a Canadian credential, you can come to New Brunswick and get to work right away. It's not something we're doing conditional on reciprocity. It's something that we're doing upfront to help make sure that the New Brunswick economy can move and has access to the labor it needs.
Ms. Holt's government is set to table legislation soon that would allow New Brunswick companies to sell alcohol directly to consumers in other provinces and permit New Brunswickers to transport spirits across provincial boundaries. Donald Trump's steel and aluminum tariffs are now in their second day, and the industries impacted are already bracing for what comes next. We spoke with Ted Betts from Gowling's WLG on just how significant the blow will be for the industry, and if there are alternative markets that can be shifted to.
Obviously, it will be very impactful, both in terms of the exports that go to the U.S. It's a significant price increase on existing exports from our manufacturers of steel. It's also an indirect cost to construction projects coming back into Canada, because our steel products and raw materials get incorporated into goods and products and materials that then get finished and then shipped back, such as equipment or HVAC machines. And so the cost of those will also go up. So it's doubly impactful. There are multiple complexities to the steel industry. It's wrong to think of it as an American steel industry and an aluminum industry and a Canadian steel industry and an aluminum industry. It's an integrated market. And so in the short term, it will be very challenging for anybody to immediately and abruptly find alternatives. So prices will just simply go up. There's no avoiding that, especially for projects that are already underway, or for goods and supply chain needs that are immediate. You've got ongoing businesses. This is an immediate and abrupt change to the pricing. Longer term, there are certain products and goods and parts of the market that are more versatile, have more options, more sources, but you really have to look at the really niche type of steel or aluminum product that you're needing, the raw materials that you need, whatever the ultimate good that you're producing will vary greatly, because there isn't just a steel product or a aluminum product. There's multiple, and there are multiple manufacturers and suppliers of all of them. In some cases, it will be an extreme challenge for Americans to find alternate sources of good quality aluminum or steel, and that will be a very, very big problem for them.
We also asked Mr. Betts about whether or not these tariffs violate the USMCA, which was negotiated and signed by Donald Trump in his first term as president.
So steel and aluminum are covered by the USMCA, and so it is a violation. I think that is a very clear violation. What Trump has declared, and in all of the press releases and statements from the White House, is they are declaring this a national emergency. They're declaring that the immigration that is coming from Canada, illegal immigration from Canada to the United States, and the distribution of fentanyl and other illicit drugs from the into the United States from Canada constitute suddenly a national emergency under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of the United States. That is an exception. We do have a right to challenge that under the trade agreements. Those trade agreements are treaties, and they don't have a lot of teeth. There are procedures. We can challenge them in the U.S. courts and rise up through the dispute processes in the courts, but that takes years. And there's not a lot of clarity given, deliberately so, around what is a true emergency, what is truly a national security emergency or not. And so the courts would naturally give a government of the day a lot of leeway in defining what's an emergency, what's a national security issue. I think pretty clearly this does not constitute that, but it would take years to get through that process. And next year, the USMCA is up for renegotiation anyways. And so it's likely a remedy without any teeth that would resolve itself in the natural course of diplomacy and negotiations on steel itself.
Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly says that she will be raising the issue of tariffs in every meeting of the G7 as ministers gather in Quebec. Her counterparts from some of the world's most powerful countries include U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio are in attendance. While Ms. Joly is looking to raise the issue of tariffs to coordinate a response with the Europeans, Mr. Rubio has said that the meeting will focus on Ukraine and North American security. President Donald Trump welcomed Irish Prime Minister Michael Martin on Wednesday for the annual St. Patrick's Day celebration at the White House, where he added Ireland to the list of countries he says are taking advantage of the United States.
Very importantly, now it is what it is. The Democrats should get with us and come up with good tax policy so that Ireland and other countries can't take our businesses away from us. And he understands exactly. You guys did the right thing. I'm not upset with you. I respect what you've done. You've done a great job. But our people did a very bad job. Now, I just will say this, but with all that we've said, we can talk about right now. There's a massive deficit. I don't mean by a little bit. I mean, there's a massive deficit that we have with Ireland and with other countries too. And we want to sort of even that out as nicely as we can, and we'll work together. We're going to work together great, but the deficit is massive.
The president has been sparring with U.S. allies and adversaries over trade. During the appearance with Mr. Martin, Mr. Trump repeated his claim that the European Union was created just to stick it to the U.S.
The European Union treats us very badly. They have for years. I saw that. I had it out with them in my first term. Did well, but we had to solve other problems, and we did. But European Union's been very tough, and it's our turn too. You know, we get a turn at that also, but they have not been fair. They sue our companies and win massive amounts of money. They sued Apple, won $17 billion, and they use that for other reasons, I guess, or to run the European Union. So I'm not knocking it. They're doing what they should be doing, perhaps, for the European Union, but it does create ill will. And as you know, we're going to be doing reciprocal tariffs. So whatever they charge us, we're charging them. Nobody can complain about that. Whatever it is, it doesn't even matter what it is. If they charge us 25 or 20% or 10% or 2% or 200%, then that's what we're charging them. And so I don't know why people get upset about that, because there's nothing more fair than that.
And this morning, Donald Trump stuck with his retaliation response as he threatened a 200% tariff on European wine, champagne, and spirits. Mr. Trump took to social media, saying the new tariffs will be imposed if the EU goes forward with a planned 50% tariff on American whiskey, expected to go into effect on April 1st. When we come back from the commercial break, we'll be speaking to the vice president at Leger about a recent poll on the tight race for support between the conservatives and liberals.
Well, it's not uncommon, if for myself, I'm probably dating myself here, but I was around the days of Mr. Mulrooney when he was quite unpopular and left the scene, and there was a fairly vigorous race.
A new poll suggests that 2 in 5 Canadians are worried about losing their jobs in the current unprovoked trade war with the United States. The online Leger survey says Ontarians are most concerned, with over half saying they're scared of losing their jobs. On the flip side, 1 in 4 people in Atlantic Canada and Quebec say they're worried. 2 in 5 are worried in BC, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, and 1 in 3 Alberta residents are concerned. A date and time has now been set for the new Liberal leader, Mark Carney, who will officially replace Justin Trudeau as Canada's Prime Minister. A ceremony is set for 11 a.m. Eastern in the Rideau Hall Ballroom on Friday after Mr. Trudeau's formal resignation. Mr. Carney was selected as Liberal leader Sunday in a landslide, capturing nearly 86% of the Liberal vote, far ahead of front-runner Chrystia Freeland, who got just 8%. A federal election call is widely expected soon after Mr. Carney is installed as Prime Minister before the House of Commons returns. And following the announcement that Mark Carney will be sworn in on Friday, Justin Trudeau spent his last day as Prime Minister sharing his final farewell on X with the caption, "Hey Canada, one last thing."
I am so proud of Canadians. I'm proud to have served a country full of people who stand up for what's right, rise to every occasion, and always have each other's backs when it matters most. This may be my last day here in this office, but I will always be boldly and unapologetically Canadian. My only ask is that no matter what the world throws at us, you always be the same.
And a new Leger poll suggests the federal Liberals and Conservatives are running neck and neck in voter support. The poll of Canadians' voting intentions released this week has both parties sitting at 37%. The survey was conducted online and cannot be assigned a margin of error. It shows a drop of 6 points for the Conservatives and a 7% jump for Liberals since February 24th, while the NDP is down 2 points to 11%. Leger surveyed 1,548 Canadians between March 7th and March 10th, which means the poll wrapped up just after the Liberals picked Mark Carney as their new party leader. We're now joined by Andrew Enns, Executive Vice President at Leger. Andrew, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be with you, Teresa.
Now, based on your polling, it looks like we're in for a much tighter election than anyone had kind of expected. Can you walk us through just how quickly Liberal support has bounced back?
Well, yeah, certainly. I think we all sort of went into the Christmas break and New Year's thinking that we're entering an election year and it was going to be a rather boring, a boring event, and suddenly we are not in a boring event at all. Look, liberal fortunes started to change. Not very far after Donald Trump started to saber rattle around trade tariffs, Canada becoming a 51st state. And that suddenly got Canadians' attention and very quickly changed the dynamic in terms of sort of the national sentiment.
Now, do you think a lot of it is driven on the fact that Donald Trump has made these tariff threats, or do you think that Trudeau resigning has been a large factor in the response for Liberal support?
For sure, I actually break it down into sort of three sort of factors here. The Donald Trump in the trade tariff threats, the trade war, the 51st state has really amped up national pride, anger in the population, and it's completely taken Canadians' attention away from the internal state of what the government and Canada, and suddenly it's a rally to arms, and I think that's actually had a very big impact. It's also then the second thing I would say, it's also put the government in a space where they're now confronting Donald Trump, retaliatory tariffs. We've got to take this on. We've got to stand united. This is the first time the Canadian government, the Liberal government, has actually been on a message that a huge majority of Canadians are supporting. It's been, I'd argue, probably 7 or 8 years, since they've been a really positive message in terms of Canadian attitudes. So that's helped them in terms of help that Liberal brand. And then I would say the third thing, and you alluded it to, Teresa, is the change in some personalities, the departure of a very unpopular leader, Mr. Trudeau. Although I think he's probably wishing he might have had to wait 10 days. He might have been in a different situation. But nonetheless, his departure and then the arrival on a new figure into the scene, Mr. Carney, a figure that I would say is known to Canadians, but not well known. And the description they get is, it's reasonable at this stage. Former Bank of Canada, former Bank of England, economist, those are all good things. And so that's helped attract some support as well. So three factors, perfect timing, and we've got ourselves a real barn burner of an election, I think, coming up.
Now, we've talked about the increase in support, but where is this support coming from? Are they peeling voters away from the Conservatives, or is it the NDP, or is it both?
Well, it started. It started with the NDP. We started to see the liberals slowly creep up. From what we were traditionally had them at in our Leger polling around 22-23%. They started to creep up to those high 20s, and that looked like it was largely at the expense of the NDP. The NDP now are down around that low teens. But now I would say the last 2 to 3 weeks, we started to see some erosion in that Conservative support. So there's a bit of support now being drawn from Conservative voters. They're now switching and kind of heading into that Liberal camp. I will say, I think this is a fairly dynamic and fluid situation in the country. And I think this campaign is like most campaigns, but I think this one in particular, the campaign is going to be quite important for both party leaders.
So, your polling shows that only 29% of Canadians want the current government to form the next government, and yet 37% support the Liberals. How do we make sense of that gap?
Well, I think, quite frankly, it's the fact that there is a lot of competing issues and topics out there for vying for voter attention. I mean, we, you know, how it manifests in our vote, Teresa, in terms of the Trump tariffs and his aggressive behavior towards Canada is really going to be interesting to see. And I think it is actually something that can move throughout the campaign. But I do think that you've got the government doing the right things, defending Canada, rallying the troops, retaliatory tariffs. So there's there's positivity there, but there is also this, not that far back in a lot of Canadians' subconscious, is that this was a government that had been around for 9 years. There were lots of problems. There's still lots of problems. So I'm not sure. So I think that's really where this campaign is going to be a tug of war of whose narrative can win the day.
Now, you did mention that the Liberal Party having a new face in Mark Carney could have played a factor in the bump that the Liberals have seen. But how common is it for a party to see a polling bump after a new leader is elected?
Well, it's not uncommon. If for myself, I'm probably dating myself here, but I was around the days of Mr. Mulrooney when he was quite unpopular and left the scene, and there was a fairly vigorous race between two new young progressive conservatives, and Kim Campbell won the day, and she actually reversed Tory polling trends quite dramatically over those summer months when she was in power, only to see that disappear as quickly as it came. We saw similar with Mr. Turner when he took over for Mr. Trudeau. When we've seen a bit of that in provincial politics. But you can also sometimes not see those bumps. It all depends in terms of the other situation around, like in Manitoba, where I'm currently at. There was a leadership change there in that government, and it didn't really make much change in the polling fortune. So it's a bit of a wild card. But I would say for the Liberal Party of Canada, where they were at the end of 2024, I think they would they would love the fact that they're in a bit of a wild card situation now in terms of it could go either way, because it was only going to go one way at the end of 2024 for that party electorally.
Right now, there is a lot of speculation on when the next election is going to be. Based on your polling, what do Canadians want? Do they want an election in the spring?
Well, I think, we asked that question in terms of immediately or, an election in April, May, and we've got almost 50% are saying, spring or earlier. So I think there's a large percentage of Canadians that actually are anxious to get going to the polls. Quite frankly, Teresa, I think if the election's called, I think you'll get more questions from the public if an election is not called quickly, because I think there's just been a lot of talk about this in the media. The question around Mr. Trump and these tariffs, we've heard provincial premiers talk about the need for a federal government with a new, strong, stable mandate. I do think that if things drag on too long, you actually might get a backlash of people wondering, like, what are we waiting for? We need to get this done.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for the time today.
I appreciate the conversation. I've enjoyed it.
All right, up next, UN-backed experts are accusing Israel of a systematic use of sexual, reproductive, and other gender-based violence.
Prime Minister's office have a response to the UNHCR report accusing Israel of the systematic use of sexual, reproductive and other gender-based violence. Thank you for that question, David. If you ever wanted to know
UN-backed experts have accused Israel of, quote, the systematic use of sexual, reproductive, and other gender-based violence in its war against Hamas. The report examined the widespread destruction of Gaza, the use of heavy explosives in civilian areas, and the Israeli attacks on hospitals and health facilities. Our news director asked a spokesperson for Israel's prime minister this morning for the Israeli government's response.
David Clement from the News Forum, does the Prime Minister's office have a response to the UNHCR report accusing Israel of the systematic use of sexual, reproductive and other gender-based violence? Thank you for that question, David. If you ever wanted to know what the word chutzpah means, it means bare-faced cheek. Hamas, which sought to sacrifice all of its people, it's not upset that there are civilians killed in Gaza. It only wishes there were more civilians killed in Gaza. Hamas, that instituted the most appalling sexual violence against Israel's people. Dozens of our people, women and men, were sexually abused, raped, killed, mutilated, sometimes in front of their families, with the purpose of which was to create degradation and dehumanization and shame. They sought to shame our people. Now, for the UN, which should be on the side of humanity and of decency, to take the side of Hamas is absolutely appalling. This is the crimes of which we are being accused of are precisely the crimes which Hamas instituted. Again, Israeli hostages were held in Gaza hospitals, not for treatment, but for torture. That is why our Prime Minister today has actually said that the UN's Human Rights Council is an anti-Israel circus. It's long been exposed as an anti-Semitic, rotten, terrorist-supporting and irrelevant body. That's why Israel withdrew from it. About a month ago, there has been no focus on the crimes against humanity and the war crimes committed by Hamas, by the Hamas terrorist organization. Just this attempt to cover them up. Nothing on the crimes which they've committed, nothing on the worst massacre committed against the Jewish people since the Holocaust, nothing, no. The UN instead seeks to attack Israel. So, David, these are false accusations, including unfounded accusations of sexual violence. The Council speaks for Hamas. Why? Because just like UNRWA, they want Hamas to win. This is not a human rights council. As the Prime Minister said, this is a blood libel council. Jew hatred and lies from the past, from medieval times, brought right up to date for 2025. So we say in a loud and united voice from here in Israel to the UNHCR, shame on you, shame on this rotten body, and shame on the United Nations.
U.S. officials are headed to Russia to discuss a potential ceasefire in Ukraine, according to President Donald Trump.
But we had a great success yesterday. We have a full ceasefire if it kicks in. We have to see. It's up to Russia now. But we've had a good relationship with both parties, actually. And we'll see. We'll be knowing people are going to Russia right now as we speak. And hopefully we can get a ceasefire from Russia. And if we do, I think that would be 80% of the way to getting this horrible bloodbath finished. It's a bloodbath is taking place over there. On average, 2,000 to 3,000 young people a week are being killed in that stupid war that would have never happened if I were president. So we have people going over there. Mr. VP, do you have anything to say about it? Because you're very much involved. What's going to happen?
Well, we've got some conversations that are happening on the phone and in person with some of our representatives over the next couple of days. As the president said, we think that we're in a very good place where the Ukrainians have agreed to a ceasefire, and we're now going to see whether we can get the Russians to agree to a ceasefire too, and we'll certainly have news on that when we find out that news.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the U.S. believes that the only way to end the fighting is through peace negotiations. Russian President Vladimir Putin said today that Russia agrees in principle to the U.S. ceasefire proposal, but the terms need to be worked out. Russia's defense ministry has announced it has regained control of Suja, a town that had been seized by Ukrainian forces following their surprise cross-border offensive into Russia last August. President Vladimir Putin visited the Kursk region on Wednesday, expressing confidence that his forces were on the brink of fully liberating the first Russian region to come under foreign occupation since World War II. The Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs has warned that Canada trade war with Donald Trump could cost Canadian fire departments billions, threatening access to critical equipment. We sat down with the CAFC president, Ken McMullen, to discuss how cost hikes could leave fire departments unprepared for the 2025 fire season.
Timing of this, in all fairness, probably couldn't be worse. The fact of the matter is, over the last 3 years, the association has conducted what we call the Great Canadian Fire Census, where we asked fire chiefs from the 3,200 fire departments across Canada to provide critical information about the state of their own readiness as a Canadian fire service. Even prior to the conversations around tariffs, the information and the data came back to us is pretty staggering. 60% of all fire departments in Canada have indicated that they've deferred purchasing of equipment and training for at least 2 years. 20% of the fire departments in Canada say that they're using outdated frontline apparatus. Now let's add on this component of tariffs. We could see up to $300,000 added to just one purchase of a fire truck. I tell you, most municipalities can't go back to a council tomorrow morning and ask for, oh, by the way, I need another $300,000. It doesn't work that way. The fact of the matter is that procurement takes time, between 1 and 4 years time from the date signing a piece of paper to purchase a new fire truck through to delivery. We can't budget an additional $300,000 in this case. So as we stare down the gun of the wildfire season barrel, this is just the fact that we have to be better prepared, and quite frankly, it's concerning.
We also discussed how creating a national fire administration could help manage these rising costs.
The Canadian Fire Chiefs, we've been on record for several years now talking about the value of a national fire administration. And every time I say it, I regretfully have to say now more than ever it's needed. And I can say that here, sitting here this morning in Quebec City, that it is needed now more than ever as we change government, as we talk about platforms of what a pending election might look like. This has to be on the agenda. This has to be something that's discussed for Canadians. We are the only country of our size that does not have a position within the federal government to oversee fire-related policy issues. Our closest comparator, the one that we all talk about right now, is the United States. The United States Fire Administration has been in existence since 1976. It employs 150 staff. It runs a training facility. We're not there, nor do we intend on being there anytime soon. It took 50 years for our counterparts to get there. But we need to start somewhere. We need a position within the federal government that allows chiefs to bring in an opinion, chiefs to bring in our data at critical points during conversations. What happens more times than not today is the fire chiefs might get to be able to bring in our opinion, but it's far, far down in the process. Decisions are likely already made or very close to being confirmed is when they ask the fire chiefs to bring our thoughts in. We can't wait that long. We need to be able to be at the table earlier on, and an administration would allow us to do that. In the absence of that, we feel, me, the president of the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs, we're filling that void, but we're doing it with very little authority. It's just based on relationships today.
Finally, we touched on what contingency plans exist if tariffs hit without exemptions.
I think the brute reality is that it'll force departments to work with older equipment longer. There is not a lot of alternatives. We have great working relationships with some of our distributors here in Canada that are in the business of fire trucks. The reality is the components, the chassis, the motors, every component of those likely are coming out of the United States. The Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs, we are for Team Canada. We believe in making sure that we do everything we can to support the Canadian economy. We're just really put up against the corner as far as what is available for Canadian fire services to use outside of North America. I've been asked about whether or not we could use products from the United Kingdom, Europe. The fact is today's infrastructure, and I'm talking things like fire hydrants, I'm talking about standpipe systems that are in our buildings, are built for North American standards, not built for what's built in other parts of the world. It's not completely off the radar for options. Everything from our personal protective equipment, our helmets, the bunker gear that we wear, 80 to 90% of that all comes out of the United States. Maybe in those applications, there might be something feasible out of Europe or United Kingdom. It's not something that we are looking at today.
Coming up, we'll be speaking to Dr. Abhishek Raut following the 5-year anniversary since a worldwide pandemic was declared due to the spread of COVID-19.
Well, in the early stages of the pandemic, we had overwhelming cascade upon cascade of challenges in our healthcare system. And it really was something that tested our resilience.
This week marked 5 years since the World Health Organization officially declared the rapid spread of COVID-19 to be a worldwide pandemic. The pandemic managed to impact almost every sector and industry, but none more so than the healthcare industry, both here in Canada and in other countries. I sat down with Dr. Abhishek Raut, medical director at Appletree Medical Group, to discuss some of the challenges that Canada's healthcare industry faced in the early stages of the pandemic.
Well, in the early stages of the pandemic, we had overwhelming cascade upon cascade of challenges in our healthcare system. And it really was something that tested our resilience on multiple fronts. First, there was a big surge in patient numbers. So hospitals across Canada experienced this unprecedented pressure with ICU units in several provinces operating at near full capacity. I'm sure we remember reports from areas like Ontario and Quebec showing ICU occupancy rates climbing at over 90% during peak times, and really forcing healthcare professionals such as myself to make heart-wrenching decisions about resource allocation and patient prioritization. Simultaneously, we had a shortage of PPE, or personal protective equipment, which was a critical threat. We saw global supply chains disrupted. Canada was no exception, and many healthcare workers had to contend with either inadequate supplies or resorting to reusing equipment, which not only jeopardized their own safety, but also heightened the anxiety during patient care. We saw staffing challenges, which compounded a lot of these difficulties. Many frontline workers fell ill, had to quarantine, and those who remained faced these grueling shifts, leading to a lot of burnout. So the intense pressure of long working hours, the emotional toll of losing patients, as well as colleagues, really contributed to a mental health crisis amongst healthcare teams as well. And surveys did indicate that nearly half of Canadian frontline workers reported severe stress and anxiety during those early months. A big hurdle as well was this rapid transition to virtual care. So, to adhere to the social distancing protocols, healthcare providers had to really swiftly adopt telemedicine. And although the shift was very, very necessary, it highlighted significant discrepancies in digital access. And we saw, especially in the rural and underserved communities, they required both providers and patients to navigate these new technologies and really overcome these hurdles. And then finally, what we did see was this constant evolution of medical guidelines and protocols. So it was a huge environment of uncertainty. Our understanding of the virus itself was evolving, and so did these recommendations, sometimes multiple times in a short time span. So this relentless flow of new information required continuous training, continuous adaptation, and really left a lot of people feeling overwhelmed by the change of pace.
In addition, we asked Dr. Rout about what hard lessons were learned during the pandemic, as well as what changes have been made as a result.
So I think the pandemic has really underscored for us a lot of crucial lessons that really have redefined our approach and continue to do so in Canada. One of the big significant takeaways was this undeniable importance of preparedness and adaptability. So early in the crisis, we witnessed how vulnerable our system could be when confronted with just a rapid surge in cases. That was it. And it became clear that in this comprehensive emergency planning, we need to have a robust stockpiling of essential supplies like PPE, like ventilators. And so it's important to have that stockpile to really support and safeguard patients and healthcare providers. Another big lesson was really the value of digital innovation. It took a lot of time to get there, but especially in the realm of telemedicine, virtual care has now played a huge role and has forced us in a good way to transform on how we deliver healthcare services. In some provinces like Ontario, virtual services increased dramatically, even over 90% in the initial months. And what that has done is, in some ways, allowed us to examine our weaknesses, perhaps in remote and underserviced areas, and bolster how we can really improve those services and still continue to have it very patient-centered. Another big lesson I think that we've learned is the importance of robust mental health support services, especially for healthcare professionals. This prolonged exposure to high stress conditions really did lead to this tremendous widespread burnout and emotional strain among staff and healthcare providers. And then finally, what the pandemic has really exposed the need for is having a very clear and coordinated health communication pattern in a way that allows us to share data across different levels of government very quickly. And this experience has, in fact, spurred some investments in improving our data infrastructure and integrating a lot of public health systems so that provinces can now share information more effectively and make more informed decisions in the future.
And finally, we spoke to Dr. Rout about what could have been done to avoid the politicization of COVID-19 policies during the pandemic.
I think the politicalization of COVID policies, in many ways, looking at it as a physician and also a citizen, formed a secondary crisis that really added to all of the challenges that our healthcare system faced. In retrospect, I think there were a lot of strategies that could have helped steer the conversation towards science rather than towards politics. So first, really establishing a centralized independent panel of experts from the very beginning could have made a significant difference. Now, we've seen this in countries like New Zealand and Germany, where decisions were really guided by healthcare professionals and scientists. And that really enhanced public trust and showed that the policies were based solely on evolving evidence. In Canada, we mobilized a similar board, drawing from the experience of the Public Health Agency of Canada, leading academic researchers and frontline clinicians. And it could have provided, I think, more clear and consistent messaging, which was insulated from the obvious political pressures. Statistics from surveys throughout the pandemic showed that 60% of Canadians trusted health experts over political figures for COVID-19 updates. And this is just a reminder on how important it is to focus more on the science of any disease. Secondary, I think the transparent and consistent communication was crucial. Instead of rapidly shifting guidelines focused on political agendas, I think a steady flow of evidence-based updates could have prevented a lot of confusion. A dedicated communication hub could really have united a lot of federal and provincial messaging. And we did see that. We saw clear communications from provinces like British Columbia, where we saw regular science-first briefings, and really it showed a higher adherence of the population to public health measures compared to regions where we saw more politicized messaging. I think also just engaging more community leaders and local influencers in that information dissemination could have really helped contextualize the policies for diverse communities. Canada has a lot of diversity, and certainly using local leaders would have been very helpful. And I think that the big message here is we need to find out how to legislate an insulation of public health decision-making from political interference. So that way, when we establish protocols and where medical guidelines are reviewed, these guidelines are not necessarily enforced or interfered upon by political realms, and they're not used to advance a political agenda.
A launch pad problem prompted SpaceX to delay a flight to the International Space Station on Wednesday to replace NASA's 2 stuck astronauts. The new crew needs to get to the International Space Station before Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams can head home after 9 months in orbit. Concerns over a critical hydraulic system arose less than 4 hours before the Falcon rocket's evening liftoff from NASA's Kennedy Space Center.
Hey, for awareness, team needs a couple more minutes here, wrapping up this hydraulics issue. At this time, we are standing down from today to further address hydraulic release data.
And we did just get that update. Unfortunately, we are scrubbing for today's launch.
Officials had hoped the next launch attempt could happen as early as Thursday, but it has now been delayed until Friday at the earliest. And Pope Francis's recovery from double pneumonia continues, as a chest X-ray has confirmed improvement. The latest medical bulletin says the condition of the 88-year-old pontiff remains stable, but it notes a complex picture considering his overall state. Today, Francis marks the 12th anniversary of his election as the 266th Pope. The Holy See hasn't said how the anniversary might be commemorated. What students thought was an AI-generated prank was actually the real deal, as A-lister Steve Carell dropped in on several high schools around Los Angeles with a special announcement. He announced that all the seniors' prom tickets had been paid for by a nonprofit that he had personally worked alongside before. The nonprofit Alice's Kids is donating $175,000 US to send 800 seniors to the prom. Mr. Carell starred in a video that was played in assembly halls at 6 schools in Altadena, California.
Attention! Attention all seniors. This is Steve Carell with a very special announcement. I work with a wonderful charity based out of Virginia called Alice's Kids. And Alice's Kids wanted me to let you know that they will be paying for all of your prom tickets. And if you have already paid for your prom tickets, they will reimburse you for your prom tickets. It's a pretty good deal. Have fun, enjoy the prom. And remember, this is Steve Carell. Take it easy, guys.
I'm Teresa Skubic, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. For more news on demand, you can always visit our website at forumdailynews.ca. Good night, Canada.